Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you don't know me, I'm Anna. I am a psychologist in training, a doctoral intern in clinical psychology. So if this is your type of content, I hope you decide to stay. Today we're talking again about the book Why Does He Do That by Lundy Bancroft, and he is a counselor who treated male abusers for over 30 years. We're going to be talking about what causes abuse. And yes, we are talking more specifically about male abusers because, as we'll see in the video itself and some of the things he talks about, the way that men and boys are socialized enables a type of abuse that obviously not all men actually end up acting on. A lot of men overcome these obstacles in this type of socialization, but for those that don't, this is very much the conceptualization that Bancroft comes up with in terms of why men become abusive. Now, I will say a lot of the cognitive and behavioral pieces about why people are abusive that we're going to talk about today apply to people of all genders. It's really just the part about male socialization that is specific to men or to people who were socialized to be male. So let's just get straight into it. What causes abuse? The number one and only thing that causes a person's abuse is their decision to act abusive. Abuse is caused solely by that person's decision, actions, and moral compass that is askew. It is their choices, their behaviors, their actions that cause abuse. It is never the risk factors that cause their abuse. It is never society as a whole. It is never the victim. It is always the person choosing to be abusive. Now you might be saying, well, what about, people that seem to not want to be abusive, but it's more of an unconscious thing? To that I say, no one is ever abusive all of the time in every single situation that they wish they could be. There are people who are abusive at home or abusive with their intimate partner that are not abusive at work, out in public, when the police comes over. That is because they decide when to be abusive and when not to. It is very, very rarely actually a matter of they just lose control and dissociate. And even if a person is under the influence of a substance really heavily, let's say they black out, they might not remember what they did the next day, but they knew what they were doing in the moment. A person who is under the influence is more vulnerable to abuse, but it is never that substance abuse actually causes someone to become an abuser, because that's not how it works. Substances can lower your inhibitions, but what happens when your inhibitions are lowered are on you. It is your instincts that you still have to be responsible for. So the primary thing that causes abusive behavior is the decision on the abuser's part to let themselves have the permission to behave abusively. Bancroft talks about the abusive mentality. So how an abuser actually thinks, how they can justify in their head that they can choose to be abusive in a situation. First one is that an abuser is controlling. An abuser thinks that they have the right to decide what other people do with their lives. That one's pretty straightforward. They might control arguments and decision making, the personal freedoms of the other person, parenting, and so forth and so on. Aspect number two of the abusive mentality is that an abuser is entitled. This is important. Entitlement is the abuser's belief that he has a special status and that it provides him with exclusive rights and privileges that do not apply to his partner. The attitudes that drive abuse can largely be summarized by this one word. In other words, an abusive person believes that they are entitled to pretty much anything that they want, and that supersedes completely other people's wants and needs. Bancroft says, my fundamental task as a counselor is to get the abusive man to expand his perception of his partner's and children's rights to their proper size and to shrink his view of his own rights down to where it belongs. Because abusers believe that those around them need to give them physical caretaking, sexual caretaking, deference to their tastes and opinions, and freedom from accountability. Another really, really important aspect of the abusive mentality is that an abuser will twist things into their opposites. This is one that people really, really struggle to understand when talking about abuse. We see this a lot with Darvo. We see this with a lot of reverse victimization claims. People want to give everyone the benefit of the doubt And because of the way we're socialized, unfortunately, that means that we give the benefit of the doubt to abusers way more than we do to survivors of abuse. The best way to get someone off your back about your abusive behavior is to make them believe that they are actually the abusive one. Gaslighting works kind of on a similar path. Someone will come to you and say, hey, I don't like how you did this and that, and they will immediately twist it into, you're so crazy, what are you talking about? I never did that. So how you initially come to them with a concern, and by the end of the discussion, you're the one that ends up feeling guilty. Blame deflection works the same way as well. You come to someone saying, hey, I don't like how you did this and that. Suddenly they've deflected to something completely different where you're off kilter and you end up feeling bad for them. When people defend themselves against abuse, the abuser uses that to say, see, you're the abusive one, you're the unhinged one, you're crazy, you need help, without acknowledging that they were the one that was abusive. This person is just trying to fight back. This person is just trying to defend themselves. Never will you actually hear an abuser take responsibility for their actions. They might take responsibility for a little bit here and there to say, oh yeah, you're right, I shouldn't have had so much to drink that day. You're so right, I shouldn't have slept with this other person. But they will never take full responsibility, because even when they do take responsibility, it is still to deflect from the real issue. The abuser's highly entitled perceptual system causes him to mentally reverse aggression and self-defense. He gives the example of one of his clients who attacked his female partner in a life-threatening way, and then when his partner fought back, he defined her actions as violence toward him. And when he then injured her further, he claimed he was defending himself against her abuse. When I challenge my clients to stop bullying their partners, they twist my words around just as they do their partners. They accuse me of having said things that have little connection to my actual words. An abuser says, you're saying I should lie down and let her walk all over me because I told him that intimidating his partner is unacceptable no matter how angry he is. He says, your approach is that whatever she does is okay because she's a woman, but because I'm the man, there's much stricter rules for me because I pointed out his double standards and insisted that he should live by the same rules he applies to her. Abusive mentality number 4 is that an abuser disrespects their partner and considers themselves to be superior to their partner. They view their partner as less than in pretty much any sphere that you can think of, any sphere that they consider important, really. And this helps them to objectify and then dehumanize their partner so that they can better appease their guilt when they then abuse their partner. So that they can sort of justify it in their head to the point where over time they cease to even see their partner as human, and they don't even really feel that bad anymore. Abuse and respect are diametric opposites. You do not respect someone whom you abuse, and you do not abuse someone who you respect. Abusive mentality number 5, an abuser confuses love and abuse. Abuse is not about you love this other person so much that it just drives you crazy. You become so jealous and possessive and controlling because you just love them so much. Abuse is about loving yourself so much that you don't care about what the other person feels. People love each other immensely. I think we can probably all agree that one of the strongest loving bonds between creatures is that of a parent and child. And in a parental relationship, you would never say, oh, she's being abusive to her daughter because she just loves her so much. That's not how it works. Passion can exist in a romantic or sexual relationship without it being abusive. Abusive mentality number 6 is that an abuser is manipulative. If someone were abusive in really physical ways all the time, their partner probably would not have much motivation to stay. It's about this intermittent reinforcement between, I don't know if I'm going to get abused today or if I'm going to get the nice version of them. It really gets people hooked. So some of the ways that abusers switch up their personality and manipulate people to keep them on the line are changing their moods abruptly and frequently so that you can't tell what you're going to get that day, sort of keeping you constantly off balance, constantly walking on eggshells. Denying the obvious about what he is doing or feeling, denying it to your face, refusing to admit it, which can drive you crazy with frustration. He may call you irrational for getting so upset by his denial, convincing you that what he wants you to do is what's best for you, making his selfishness look like generosity, getting you to feel sorry for him, getting you to blame yourself or other people for what he does, using confusion tactics and arguments such as changing the subject, insisting you are thinking or feeling things that you aren't, twisting your words, lying or misleading you about his actions, desires, or reasons for doing certain things, getting you and the people you care about turned against each other by betraying confidences, being rude to your friends, telling people lies about what you supposedly said about them, charming your friends, and then telling them bad things about you, and so forth. So the manipulation that is more sort of subtle, more covert, a lot of times, is what keeps people entrenched in that pattern where the more escalated forms of abuse can take place. Abusive mentality number 7, he strives to have a good public image. Abusers often are very preoccupied with how other people and the public and the general world perceives them. They want to be seen as a good person. They want other people to not tarnish their reputation, which is part of the reason why they get so angry when people actually call them out on their abusive behavior. The fact that they can put on this clean face in front of everyone else where they are generous and kind and respectful and soft-spoken, mild-mannered, proves that they are making a choice when they are abusive behind closed doors, when they are abusive to the people they consider it's not important to be idealized by, or people that are easier to pick on, or people that they think won't tell others. The observers think he's such a nice guy, he's just not the type to be abusive. She must have really hurt him. The abuser's nice guy friend helps him feel good about himself. My clients say to me, I get along fine with everyone but her. One of the most important challenges facing a counselor of abusive men is to resist being drawn in by the men's charming persona. Abusive mentality number 8, an abuser feels justified in abusing. They come up with all sorts of excuses, rationalizations, justifications for why they do the things that they do. There is no shortage. Even if they say, okay, yes, I did this, in the back of their head, there's always this little bird chirping saying, yeah, but you're justified because of this and that, which in reality, nothing justifies abuse, okay? Nothing justifies abuse. Abusive men are masters of excuse making. When they aren't blaming their partners, they blame stress, alcohol, their childhood, their children, their bosses, or their insecurities. More importantly, they feel entitled to make these excuses. Abusive mentality number 9, abusers deny and minimize the abuse. This goes hand in hand with feeling justified for the abuse. The two go hand in hand in that an abuser will say, I did this, okay, but I was justified in doing it, and it wasn't that bad. Let's continue reading. I frequently encounter court personnel who say, well, she accuses him of abusing her, but he denies it. They then drop the matter as if the man's denial closes the case. They also tell me, he says she does the same things to him, so I guess they abuse each other. This kind of denial and cross-accusation tells us nothing about whether the woman is telling the truth. If the man is abusive, of course he is going to deny it. If he were ready to accept responsibility for his actions and relationships, he wouldn't be abusive. Most of the men in my groups admit to some abusive behavior, although they don't see it as abusive, of course, but they acknowledge only a small portion of what they have actually done, as I learn when I interview the abused partners. And abusive mentality number 10 is that abusers are possessive. So we talked about how abusers objectify and dehumanize their partners. If you see your partner as an object, then of course you're going to treat them as an object, and you're going to treat them as a possession that is yours to do whatever you want with, that no one else can play with, so to speak. So we talked about how abuse is always caused by that person's decisions, and then we talked about some of the mentalities that comprise why that person decides to make those decisions. Now let's also talk about why this comes to be, the cognitive and behavioral aspects that cause someone to become abusive in the first place, to develop this sort of mentality. So abuse is caused by a person's cognition, so their attitudes, their beliefs, their values, their thoughts, and those cognitions are learned, usually socialized, usually from childhood, and then they are reinforced by society and the abuse itself. So let's start with how these cognitions are learned. People who are socialized as male experience a great deal of messaging from society, from our culture, that it is okay to be abusive, especially towards women. Family is really important here. So interestingly, Bancroft talks about how having an abusive mother doesn't really correlate to becoming abusive later on in life. Having an abusive father does. If you are a little boy who sees your father being abusive to your mother, then you are more likely to actually become abusive yourself. Because think about it, it makes sense. If you as a little boy identify as a masculine figure and your masculine role model behaves in this way and justifies it and blames it on your mother, understandably you're going to internalize the message that this is what it means to be a man, and actually there's nothing wrong with this. Actually, maybe this is what love is. Peers and a person's neighborhood also play a crucial role in how you're going to learn those initial cognitions and attitudes. Who you have in your friend group is immensely important. I see it as a huge red flag when someone is dating a man whose friends are all extremely misogynistic and or abusive. I see that as birds of a feather flock together, because one of the most important things for all humans is to be included socially, to feel like you belong in a group, that you are behaving in a way that is in accordance with the norms of whatever group or subgroup you're a part of. Any other role models are also important. If you look up to certain people that have abusive behaviors, like celebrities or so forth. Media and TV, that goes hand in hand with who your role models are. Who you see on TV, who you see in music videos, who you hear in songs. Politicians in power, all of these are sort of role models that normalize certain behaviors. Bancroft says, fans of these kinds of performers have been known to state defensively, "Come on, it's just humor." But humor is actually one of the powerful ways a culture passes on its values. If a man is already inclined towards abuse because of his earlier training or experience, he can find validation in such performances and distance himself even further from empathy for his partners. So please, never excuse horrible, misogynistic, abusive takes as it's just blowing off steam or oh, he's just joking. That is not valid. Religious beliefs have also been justified to entrench people in abusive power dynamics between men and women. I don't think I need to go too much into this. I think we kind of all acknowledge that all religions can be taken to a point where that is what happens. Legal systems also not only teach but also reinforce that abuse is okay. For hundreds and perhaps thousands of years, the domestic assault of women has been considered a necessary tool for a man to maintain order and discipline in his home, to make sure that his superior intelligence rules, and to avoid the mushrooming of the hysterical, short-sighted, and naive qualities that men widely attribute to women. Even fairy tales have very misogynistic, abusive undertones, weird, coercive themes that, if we really get down to it, are pretty concerning. And I think there are institutions that are trying to change that, like Disney trying to appropriate these fairy tales and make them more digestible for a more woke culture. Unfortunately, that doesn't really change where it originated from. I'm not saying that fairy tales don't have some value. I think mythology and legend is incredibly important for our psychological development. I'm also not going to sit here and start crying over the propaganda in Frozen like Jordan Peterson, but I think it's important to acknowledge that slapping a woke label over something or changing the superficial aspects of something doesn't really change the abusive origins and the messaging that it sent to earlier generations. The adult entertainment industry is also hugely responsible for the dehumanization and objectification of women and the normalization of male violence against women, to the point where even women have internalized it and think that that is what love is supposed to look like. Bancroft says that most of this content can function as training manuals for abusers, whether they intend to or not, teaching them that women are unworthy of respect and only valuable as sex objects for men. And how many serial killers do we have to hear this from before we start to believe it? And lastly, there are the ways that boys learn very early on through socialization that they are not to blame for their own behavior when it hurts other people. Bancroft gives the example of school shooters who are predominantly white boys who have learned that they are entitled to something from society, and when they are disillusioned with that entitlement, take it out on women. Headlines have described these events as kids killing kids, when close to 100% of them have involved boys killing kids. In some cases, it has been revealed that the killings were related to boys' hostility towards females. Urgent need to confront the anti-female attitudes among these boys was never mentioned as a strategy for preventing future school violence. So that's how these abusive cognitions are learned, and now let's talk about how they are reinforced in different ways. Because you know how it is, you learn something, and then the more it gets rewarded and the more other things get punished, the more entrenched you get in that pattern. Bancroft gives the example of a father who starts screaming whenever his wife asks him to do the dishes. And obviously the next day when the dirty dishes are piling up, no one dares ask him for anything because they're scared to. He has in essence punished their behavior, and he gets rewarded because he doesn't have to do his half of chores. Over time, the man grows attached to his ballooning collection of comforts and privileges. Here are some of the reasons why he may appear so determined not to stop bullying. Number 1, the intrinsic satisfaction of power and control. Obviously, we're human. It feels good to have power and control. It makes us feel important. It strokes our ego. And that in and of itself is sort of a reward, a psychological reward. Number 2, he gets his way, like in that example. In the end, he got what he wanted, and now he doesn't have to do it ever again because he punished certain behavior in his family. Number 3, he has someone to take his problems out on. He has sort of like this cathartic punching bag that he can use at all times. And even though catharsis doesn't actually really help with emotion regulation, it can certainly feel relieving in the moment. He gets free labor, leisure, and fun. Pretty self-explanatory. He gets to be the center of attention with priority given to his needs. He doesn't really have to think about other people. He can only focus on himself. Who wouldn't want that? He gets financial control. He gets to run things. He gets to decide how finances are used. He ensures that his career, his education, and his goals are prioritized. This is a common theme that we'll see in couples with abusive patterns, is one person is always self-sacrificing and the other person always has priority given to their needs, whereas when the other person actually requires a sacrifice, the abusive partner doesn't want to do anything. Public status of being a partner and or a father without the sacrifices. People get to say, oh my God, he's such a doting father because he changed the diaper once, or he's a husband, look at this beautiful ring that he got her, without actually treating the people around him well. He gets the approval of his friends and relatives. For people who are in abusive circles with abusive friends, they get strokes for knowing how to control their partner, for putting her in her place from time to time, and for ridiculing her complaints. His friends and relatives may even bond with him on the basis of his view of women in general as being irrational, vindictive, or avaricious. And lastly, double standards are a huge reward. Who wouldn't want one set of rules for them and another completely more restrictive set of rules for everyone else? It makes life extremely easy. It makes it easy to get what you want from other people and not have to ensure that you have to do the same in return. This is what people from like the manosphere preach constantly. Different set of rules for me than for my woman. You're literally describing abuse. What you're describing is abuse, and somehow you think this is something to brag about. People who understand abuse understand that that's what you're doing. You're not being slick. So that is a rundown. That concludes our series on Why Does He Do That by Lindy Bancroft. Buy the book, it's in the description box. We barely just scratched the surface in this mini-series about what he goes into with this book. I hear all the time from people, this book changed my life, it's incredible. Definitely buy it if you have the means to do so. I also have some resources in the description box if this is a topic that is heavy for you or you need additional resources. So to summarize, what causes a person's abuse is their decision to act abusively. What informs their decision to act abusively? Their cognitions, their value system, their attitudes, which are learned through socialization and then reinforced through our society and through the personal benefits that they reap. This cleared it up for you. Let me know what you think about this topic. I'll see you soon.